Yeah, I'll fill you in after. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, I think so. Put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Hey, how are you? All right, I'd like to begin. I'd like to welcome everybody to the regular meeting of the Planning Commission. Today's Thursday, June 6th at 6 p.m. I'd like to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ariana, report on posting the agenda and roll call, please.
The agenda was posted on Thursday, May 30th, 2024 at 6:20 p.m. Roll call. Commissioner Ellie?
Present.
Commissioner Leongard?
Here.
Commissioner Lewis?
Here.
Commissioner Ramirez?
Here.
Commissioner Valdez?
Here.
Vice Chair Kushner?
Here.
Chair Bondo?
Here. Ariana, are there any public comments for items not on the agenda today?
We have one speaker, but it is for an item on the agenda. So,
Okay. It's separate? Okay, it's something else. So is that for Gary?
Yes, Gary Walton. Thank you.
No, we can't. The fans are on, so I think it's...
There you go.
How about now? Okay. Okay. So thank you, Chairman and members of the Planning Commission, for the opportunity to present information on the Miller Red Barn. I'm Gary Walton, President of the Miller Red Barn Association. Mike Monroe is here. He's the association's Vice President, our Treasurer. While we're here to answer any questions that you might have, on the slides that we provided that were in your packet, I want to discuss briefly another important issue of the Miller Red Barn. So I'll just take a few minutes because I know you guys have training, but I want to take a few minutes to dive into the pool deep end and tell you why the Miller Red Barn is important. We consider the Miller Red Barn part of a broader economic development potential to attract tourism, to educate the community, and to promote local agriculture and agritourism. In 2004, Fred Kent, and I hand this handout, he came up with this, coined the term power of 10. The idea behind the concept is that places thrive when users have a range of reasons, 10 or more, to be there. This might include a place to sit, playgrounds to enjoy, people to meet. Ideally, some of these activities will be unique to that particular place, reflecting the culture and history of the surrounding community. If our goal is to build a great city, it's not enough to have a single use dominate a particular place. You need an array of activities for people. It's not enough just to have one great place in a neighborhood or a city park. You need to have several of them to create a lively community. Planners often struggle with economic development and their role in facilitating it because the purpose of economic development can unintentionally run at cross purposes to conventional planning responsibilities. The economic development profession is changing rapidly, which provides some exciting opportunities for planners and the Planning Commission to bridge that gap and play a more active role in the community's economic health. We would be happy to answer any questions about the slides on the barn. I would also like to extend an invitation to any commissioner, members that might be interested in a tour of the barn. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Are there any other speakers?
There are no further speakers.
Thank you. Moving on to 5.0, consent agenda, which are the May 2nd, 2024 Planning Commission meeting minutes. Any questions, comments, concerns?
I move to approve.
A second.
Commissioner Ellie,
Yes.
Commissioner Leongard,
Yes.
Commissioner Lewis,
Yes.
Commissioner Ramirez,
Yes.
Commissioner Valdez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kushner,
Yes.
and Chair Bondo.
Yes. Passes unanimous. Thank you. 6.0 public hearings. There are no items today. 7, new business. Miller Red Barn presentation.
Like I said, we didn't feel that we had a lot of time, but we just came to answer any questions that if you've had a chance to look at the slides. The major change is that all of those panels are now installed at the barn. And they look great. I mean, it's everybody that's seen them is just in awe. And we'd love to be able to start showing the community, Planning Commission, Park and Rec, the city, what we really accomplished, because this was an 11-year effort, and we raised almost $1.1 million to do it. And it's an important part of the city's history. Mike Monroe can tell you a lot more about that history than me, but we're here. If you have any questions or you'd like to arrange a meeting out at the barn, we'd be happy to do that.
Of course, yeah.
Hi. So I had a couple questions. I saw the barn. I was probably 90 to 95% done. It looked amazing. So a couple questions. I saw in the packet those panels that you're talking about, but it looked like they were inside. Are they inside, and then are they moved out for events, or?
No, they're attached to the wall.
Oh, they're attached to the wall. Okay,
And-
that makes sense now.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they're in cabinetry so that we can close those. Because we do expect
smart.
to work with the school district to bring the students through to talk about, the history of agriculture in the community. As the first slide said, if you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. And so we really feel that it's an important part to showcase that history, but the barn has other uses that we can use it for events and other things. But we need to protect those. There's a lot of money that's tied up in those panels, so we need to be able to close them up when we need to.
I had a second question, which is, if someone wanted to do an event there, do you have, since it's relatively new, do you have a list of vendors, like caterers, things like that are have the facilities? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
A sort of a middleman
Right.
recommendation.
We're not there yet.
Okay.
Let me tell you where we're at. We're in the process of negotiating a lease with the city, and we're also trying to work through the issue of sprinklers in the barn, because although we're exempt by the historic code, it's the city's position that they'd like to have sprinklers in there. Then there's a question, how do we pay for it? In the meantime, we're limited to 49 people without the sprinkler system.
Limited how many?
49.
Okay.
So I'm glad to know that you're going to collaborate with the school district and the schools, because I think that there's just so much history, especially for the younger students that are learning about their communities and things like that. So then once you are up and running as an event venue, you just mentioned that you would be working with the city on a lease. Would someone work with the city to rent the space, or
No, it would go through us. We're
go
a
through you.
501c3
Oh, okay.
nonprofit.
Okay.
And so we've operated under an MOU with the city since the time that we actually got control of the barn. It had originally been slated and funded for demolition, and we were able to kind of claw that back, and actually, we got it done without asking the city for any money.
And so you can, if you wanted to have an event now, up to 49 people, you just contact the Red Barn and, and
Right.
work
right.
with them.
Right. And we have a website as well, and so we're going to continue to add to that. The history panels, and I've been a builder for 40 years. That was probably the most difficult job that I've ever done, because you're trying to distill, 150 years of history into 800 words and some photos. And Mike and I, it took us a year to do that, to try to figure out. And even then, we kind of changed courses. We're going to have a QR code on each one of those panels where you could download additional information that we'll have on our website. And because there was no way to put it all on those boards. But so this is a continuing process. And we've met with the Gilroy Historical Society and laid out a dozen different ways that we could partner with them. We don't want to be a separate entity. We need to be part of the Gilroy historical aspect, and they're partners with us.
Thank you.
I know, and Andy's here too. Years ago we worked and helped the Red Barn get a grant from Santa Clara County.
We got 3 of them.
Yeah, and so it really did work out, and you got the money, and it did go forward. And
We've closed out one of the grants, and we'll close out the other 2 grants by the end of this year. So that will be done.
So it really happened. Yes.
Of course.
Yeah. And then one of the conditions of the grants was there had to be public access.
You have to maintain public access, or the money has to be paid back.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, we had to pass a resolution,
Yep.
and I remember working
well,
on that.
it's the city's barn.
Yeah. No, I was just, that was,
No, it would be, I think, in the best interest to let us handle that part of it. So we're working on a draft, kind of a lease, kind of based on what the Gilroy Historical Society has. Because like I said, I think it's really important that the 2 of us work together. They've always been supportive of us and been there when we needed them. But we, like I said, we don't want to be a separate entity. That doesn't make any sense. We all need to be in this together. It's a community, people who love history, and we're both working towards the same goal.
Gary, you might want to give them your information so they can contact you if someone
Sure.
wants to
Okay.
call.
I put my email address on the speaker card. You can always reach me there, or somebody in the city has my cell number and email address, so it wouldn't be hard to find us. And you can always go to our website, which is the millerredbarn.org, I think it is. Yeah. And then we'll be continuing to put more information on that.
Yeah, your website is on page 38 of the PDF in the packet.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
your web address is
it's on one of the slides too. Yeah. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much for the
Thanks,
time.
Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 7.2, Planning Commissioner Training, an overview of major and local and state law concepts that govern the city's planning and development projects Also, an overview of various rules and procedures that apply to Planning Commission meetings, inclering the Brown
you're gonna be
Act
here,
and Robert's
and I'll be
Rules
on
of
this.
Order.
Yeah, okay.
So I think...
You're going to start.
Yeah, I'm going to say, let me see if I can advance slides with this thing. Oh, yeah. Okay. So you can advance your slides just sitting page up and page down. Hold on.
Oh, that page.
Yeah, that's page up and page down.
Okay, so we got some feedback, so.
Let's turn this. This is off, so that should be okay. I'm not sure where we're getting it from. I'm using the... Can you hear me? Is this okay?
Yeah. And then this one's on.
Okay.
Oh, so.
I'm not sure if we can turn the volume down a bit. Okay. Let me get started. Is there any other mic that's picking us up? Or your mic's off? There's no mic here. Okay. And I can turn mine off if you're talking. Okay. All right. Okay. Good. Thanks. I'm Andy Faber. I'm the city attorney. Jolie and I are going to be providing training tonight. And we're going to be going back and forth where she has certain parts of it, I have certain parts, and we kind of go back. We're doing a variety of different topics tonight, so there can be a whole different set of things. One is Planning Commission authorization. Okay. I'm happy to speak up. And do you have a volume control, too, for the audio? I don't think there's any audio. Did that help? Okay. All right, good. Then we're going to talk about, first topic is sort of general commission authorizations. Then we're going to talk about the Brown Act and use of social media as it relates to the Brown Act. Even going to talk a little bit about Robert's Rules of Order and how they apply to certain aspects of meetings. Then the Public Records Act, some FPPC financial disqualification and recusal information. And then, depending on time, we have an overview of planning and land use summary with general plan and various permits and so on, sort of kind of a summary of all kinds of land use planning things that go on. I would encourage you to ask questions as we go along. It's more fun for us that way. It's better for you. You can, if you have a question, it's good to get it answered. And I'm going to start with Jolie. Going to hand it over to you.
Okay, so now that's going to work. So, and I know this is training that we've touched on before. We have new members, so what we're trying to do is make it a refresher for the people that have been on the commission, but then also helpful for the new commissioners. So, page down. There we go. So you all know that we are a charter city, and the charter is sort of the constitution of for the city. And in the Planning Commission and commissions are set forth in Section 900 and 906. So the Planning Commission is a charter formed commission. And then the government code, which governs general law cities, and where the charter does not control, then the government code would be. And this is the state planning law. And the section 65100 and 65103, those are the powers and duties of the planning commissioners. And it sets forth, you review and approve, review and recommend for general plans, specific plans, and zonings. You review the CIP for conformance with the general plan, and it sets forth some of those general powers and duties that you have. And Andy and I were talking about this when we were trying to figure out, what else can we add to this PowerPoint and what else can we do to sort of educate you. And I'm bringing this up because you are a little bit different than the other commissions, and because you have state law powers, you're a charter formed commission, and you really don't have a work plan like some of the other commissions that, they have a plan, the council approves it, because your review is really set forth in the government code for reviewing zoning and reviewing general plans and reviewing certain things. So you're a little bit different than the regular commissions. So you have more powers and duties as reviewing land use matters. Okay, I've got to figure out this button now. Okay, so here's the section, and it's for boards and commissions, and it says, except as otherwise provided, it's established pursuant to this charter, and you're an advisory body to the council and the city administrator. So overall, you are an advisory body. We'll get into some of the land use permits that you are a final decision maker, but your purpose is to review projects on a land use zoning type basis and then make the recommendation to the policy body, which is the council. So planning commission, this is basic. You act as a body. You need 4 to approve or deny something, and 4 votes. This is set forth in your bylaws as well. And this one is, we try to remember this all the time, but you can always be reminded. If you're changing a project's conditions of approval and it's not in the minutes or the motion, it really needs to be in the motion. So you're approving the Arkansite design permit with the 32 conditions, and someone's made a change to one of the conditions, or you've added a condition, we have to say approve Arkansite number such and such with the conditions of approval as amended or with the addition of condition 33. So we all have to remember that, because sometimes you get caught up in the motion, you take the vote, and then later on people say, oh, well, we talked about that. What happened? The barn's blue now, and I thought we wanted the barn red. And it was like, no, you talked about it, but it didn't get in the motion. Another thing that comes up sometimes is previous commission actions on ordinances, resolutions, and policies. Those remain in effect until they're changed by a vote of the commission or the council. So, and a resolution can't repeal an ordinance. An ordinance has to be replaced by an ordinance. Resolutions are replaced by new resolutions, and the policies are amended by new policies. And an example of some of this is like your bylaws. The bylaws can be changed, but they have to be changed at the Planning Commission and, at a public meeting. Okay, I've got to find this one. What I'm going to cover here is just briefly, the city has open government laws, and those are considered the Brown Act, the public records, and Gilroy does have an open government ordinance. Some people refer to them as sunshine ordinances because they go beyond the regular Public Records Act and the Brown Act. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail of the OGO. So the Brown Act applies to policy bodies or legislative bodies. It requires that local agency business be conducted at public meetings. You only consider the items on the agenda, and the public has a right to comment on all regular agenda items. Sometimes there's information items, or there's certain items that really aren't, they're just for your information. The public has a right to see those as well, but we usually don't take public comment on information items. So Brown Act, what is a meeting? It's a majority of the policy body or legislative body or commission to hear, discuss, deliberate, take action on an item within the subject matter jurisdiction. And so it's broadly interpreted, and it includes any communication of any kind to take action on an item that's within your subject matter jurisdiction. So the Brown Act, several years ago, I would have to say it's, I think it was in 96, so I guess it's more than several years ago, but there was a case out of Fremont where the city manager was meeting with individual council members, and there were briefing sections, and the court determined that that wasn't a Brown Act violation because he was not doing a collective concurrence or getting everybody to say yes on something or no on something. Then in response to that, the legislature changed the Brown Act, and they've made it broader. So it includes the process of developing a collective concurrence. So you may not get to that yes or no, but you're inching towards getting someone to come along with you, but they haven't said, that's right, I'm going to vote your way, nod, nod, wink, wink. Okay, so...
Can I interrupt
Yeah.
if I can? I don't want to cause feedback. Let me come over here and not interrupt.
You're the feedback.
I'm the problem.
You are the
Yeah,
problem,
sorry about
Andy.
that. There was also a case in the East Bay where the city manager would meet with the council members in a coffee shop,
Yeah.
but he met with two at a time. And then he moved to another table and met with another two, and then he met with another two, and took the position that because the council members were never meeting together, it was not a meeting, but a lawsuit was filed, and the court decided that was a meeting because he was passing on the information from what other people said to a different group. There was also a case out of San Jose where basically
The Little Saigon case.
yeah, there was basically a lobbyist that was getting collective concurrence by talking to council members, and he got 6 because there are 11, and the 6th was a casual conversation in an elevator where they hardly were talking about it at all, but the court held that that actual conversation in the elevator, brief though it was enough, along with his previous conversations with 5 others, to, in effect, be an illegal Brown Act meeting. So this is something that we always have to be very careful about, and that's one reason we're always very giving advice that says be very careful about, as we'll get to later, about emails that go out to everybody and things of that nature, because the Brown Act is really focused on making sure that the meetings occur in public like this.
Yeah.
In those examples, was that regarding an item that was on an agenda upcoming?
Yes.
Yeah.
It might be feedback from the monitors. Try over
There
there.
must be another mic that's picking this up somewhere, so where is it?
There's 2 people talking at the same time.
Uh-huh.
It'll cause that feedback. So she has hers on.
Okay. From
It's on.
what is the cause? Is
It's fine.
yours is off? Is it yours, or is it a monitor? Yours is off too.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll persevere one way or another.
Turning mine on. Page down. So what is a meeting? The exceptions. Individual contacts between a commissioner and a member of the public or staff. Conferences, community meetings, meetings of other legislative bodies, standing committees. The caution about standing committees is that we don't form really that many ad hoc committees here, but if you have a ad hoc committee, it's less than a majority, and they meet, and they don't have to follow the Brown Act, but they're a single subject committee. They should be less than a year. They don't have a standing agenda or standing meeting schedule. But what happens with these ad hocs is they continue on, and then they go longer than a year, and they start meeting regularly, or they start bringing some other topic in, and they morph into what is called a standing committee. And then a standing committee is subject to the Brown Act and needs to have notice and posting and minutes and everything. But that's just one of those exceptions that, you know, you have to be careful with ad hocs. They can morph into a standing committee. And then social or ceremonial events. I'll bring it up here. There was an AG opinion that came out this April, and it said that the city, the state of the city or the mayor's state of the cities or those city addresses where the council attends, they talk about city business. Sometimes you have to pay to go because it's a sit-down lunch or something like that. The court determined that that was a Brown Act meeting and it needed to be noticed, and people should be able to attend for free and observe and watch and participate. So this is that case came out, I think it was a week or two before the Gilroy State of the City. And so we worked on doing a notice and making it follow this new AG opinion. So, and it was interesting, the AG's office, they looked at, was it a ceremonial meeting? They said no, it doesn't, and it's not a social meeting, and it's not a conference. But they tried to fit it into these exceptions, and the AG was like, no, it's not. This is where the city council's meeting. They are talking about the city budget. They are talking about future projects. It was all really city business. So the AG didn't cut them any slack.
Yeah, we tried to figure out whether we could set it up so that, for example, the mayor would give the state of the city, and then there'd be no discussion. That was kind of it. There's no public comment, no council colloquy, and we finally gave up and said that isn't going to work because how do you really control that? So we followed the AG's opinion, although I don't think it's correct, actually, but that's not our decision.
So I have a question. The Downtown Ad Hoc Committee, would that be, they have an agenda and minutes, so is it ad hoc or is it standing?
They have 5 council members on it, so it should be it's a Brown Act committee.
It's a Brown Act committee. Yeah. I don't know if it's a standing committee yet, right. But it's being noticed.
Right. These ad hoc committees that Jolie was talking about are only non-Brown Act committee if they don't have a quorum. So, for example, if the council appoints a committee of 3 or 2.
I thought it was. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
No, the downtown committee has 5 council members on it.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's practically the council.
Okay.
I had a question for the State of the City. Historically, Gilroy's done a State of the City through the Chamber, and it has been a pay-for-meal. So I'm assuming the city will not allow that moving forward.
Yeah, this year it was Jimmy held it in the Chambers, and it was noticed, and so, and I think it was already scheduled to be in the Chambers.
One of the issues in the AG opinion, one of the cities they were talking about did the same thing. They had it run through a downtown association or a chamber, and basically the AG says you can't do that.
I know, it kind of spoiled kind of a fun event, but when it came out and we were having, it's like, we're not making this stuff up, this AG opinion. I sent it to Andy and I was like, when's the State of the City? And he's like, oh, it's like next week. And so we had to, kind of scramble and get it and make sure we provided notice. We didn't want the newspaper or someone saying, oh, the city's violating the Brown Act. So anyway, then, so we were talking about Brown Act and serial meetings. Andy mentioned a little bit about it. There's the chain of communication with this less than a quorum, but it results in a majority discussing or deliberating. And so the hub and spokes, that would be sort of like the city manager in the middle reaching out to everybody and trying to develop a concurrence, or one planning commissioner reaching out to everybody and developing a concurrence. And it includes telephone calls, cell phones, and emails. And Andy will get into the emails and all of that later. Yeah.
Hey, the hub and spokes can also include a third party trying to get a concurrence. In other words, a lobbyist or the developer or an applicant or a neighbor, an opponent of a project. And that's why we always tell you, if you talk to people, which you're allowed to do, we don't have a rule here that says you can't talk to people who are interested in matters, don't tell them how you're going to vote.
Yeah.
And people sometimes will ask you that. Well, can you support this? How are you going to vote? And if 4 of you tell everybody how you're going to vote, that could be a Brown Act meeting. If 4 of you talk to somebody and get information from them, that's presumably not a Brown Act meeting. Oh, okay. You're turned off? Okay, good. So this is all aimed at the issue of avoiding inadvertent meetings. So when we say don't reply all when you get an email about city business, it's because if you reply all, you may be having a meeting. And there are exceptions. For example, if Sharon emails everybody and says, hey, are you all free next week or at the end of the month, or who's going to be able to make this meeting, that's an exception. But it's a very dangerous thing of replying all or forwarding, because quite inadvertently you can end up with an illegal meeting. The same thing is true if you summarize. If you go to an off-site meeting of some sort and then send an email out to all the planning commissioners, don't do that, because, again, that can be interpreted as a meeting. And we have our regular caution of using your city email for city business. The San Jose case that's referenced here, you probably all know about it, but a few years ago, it went to the California Supreme Court, and it involved personal emails and text messages. And San Jose, let me go back, a Public Records Act request was filed for personal emails that discuss city business. And San Jose took the position that when council members used their private emails to discuss city business, those were not public records, even though normally if they'd used their city email to discuss the same things, they would be public records. And they pointed out that, first of all, it's really hard to figure out who has what. There are all kinds of privacy interests, because a person's private emails will have all sorts of private things on them, too. And the court said, too bad. You can't discuss city business on your private emails, and if you do, they're subject to disclosure. So that led to a lot of consternation about how cities should react and what they should do when they get a request like that. And Jolie perhaps could talk a little bit about that. There are various adaptations that cities have taken to try to get private emails from council members and other public officials. Do you want to comment on that or not?
Yeah, because when the case came out, I did training for the league, and we did a webinar, and at the time it was so new, and we were like, yes, we believe it applies to all public officials, but the case wasn't really clear, and then how do you develop a policy, how do you get them? And over the years, we have come up with some good guidance. The court did provide some guidance, and the city clerk's responsibility is to let the legislative body, the policy body, the planning commissioners or the council, know that we have received this request and it's asking for all emails, and now we include, well, that could include texts or everything. And please check your own private devices and accounts, iPads, phones, or whatever. And if you have anything responsive to this request, and you put the request in the email out to the planning commissioners or the council, and you have to do your own due diligence. You have to report and go do it, and then if you have anything, you send it to the clerk. We're city attorneys, and the clerks don't go check your phone. They don't check your iPad or your computer. Our obligation is to just make sure that we've conveyed the request, and then it's upon the public official how they comply with it. And the courts haven't gone any further. And that seems to be working right now fairly well. I think people are used to it.
Because the court made it clear that text messages are covered too. And I doubt that most people have any idea how to find all the text messages that might apply on their own devices, or to isolate them or to copy them. Do you think that people are really doing that, or what do you think is happening with text messages? Because I'm very skeptical about whether, in fact, text messages are getting produced.
I've seen where they screenshot them and forward them on, but it does, it's hard, and so I think it really does curb a lot of the texting about especially a pending project. The court also recommended that you could have affidavits that the legislative body member would fill out that they've received the request, they've looked at their iPad, they've checked everything off, and they do have responsive records, or they don't, or they have responsive records, but they're personal in nature. Then you go through the gamut of what is purely personal, what's mixed personal and business, and what is city business. And that's why we say have the 2 phones, have the 2 email accounts, and Andy will go into social media. I go as far as saying, have your city Facebook and have your family Facebook, but don't on your family Facebook start talking about the Red Barn or some city project. So it does. At first we thought it was really going to be problematic, but it didn't turn out to be the nightmare that we all sort of thought it was going to be. And
although there's another case now, Sam Liccardo is being sued, and he was on the council when the first San Jose case came out, and he is a lawyer, and he's being sued because allegedly he told people involved in projects, send me texts because that way I don't have to produce them. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but that's what the allegation in the lawsuit is. And I say the irony is because if he did, he was certainly very well aware of the ruling in the first San Jose case. But in any event, that suit is ongoing.
Yeah, and one last thing about the San Jose case, watching the Supreme Court arguments, the court was very concerned about privacy concerns and how do you balance that with your own personal accounts and all of that. But, a few of the justices were asking the city of San Jose attorneys, well, why would it be different if I had this public memo and I'm putting it into my filing cabinet at home? It doesn't change the nature of that memo by where it's stored. And it was really, that sort of makes sense. But we had never thought that way before. But the Public Records Act had to kind of catch up to technology. But I thought that was a really compelling. I was like, I'm glad I wasn't there and they didn't ask me that question. So anyway, now it's you, Andy, again.
Right, and something else that caught up with technology is the Brown Act. We're using our social media font here, not the staid old blocky font on the other slides. So the Brown Act recently caught up with some technology involving social media. And there are basically 2 issues that arise from the use of social media, like Facebook or Twitter or whatever. One of them is a question of what's a meeting. It's the same issue of are you somehow on social media having a meeting? And the other one has to do with violation of First Amendment rights, which I'll get to in a minute. The is it a meeting issue is primarily solved under the Brown Act by a rule that they put into the Brown Act that says you, council members, planning commissioners, city officials, you can correspond with your constituents. You can ask questions. You can have a dialogue. But don't forward anything to any other council member or commissioner. Don't friend anybody. Don't send it to friends, and don't forward and don't like. For example, if a commissioner were to put on their Facebook page, this seems like an interesting project, I think it's a good one, and someone else likes that, well, what does that mean? Well, what if 4 of you like it? Does that mean you're all 4 of you have now met, in effect, in a Brown Act meeting? The Brown Act thinks it does mean that. So the caution would be in your Facebook page, I'll give you some other cautions in a minute, but don't forward things, don't like things, don't befriend people who you're doing this business with, if you can avoid it. I'm not sure that's really possible because, we have all these friends networks. But the not liking and not forwarding is certainly something that you should do. The second issue, do you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question about email and also about social media. So for the email, when there's a public records request for email, for example, that's from the city, does it, because in our business, they go to the IT department. So same? Okay. And then,
I'll just say that's why I want everybody to use, because then IT does the search, and it makes my life better, and it makes the clerk's
and
life better.
everything
Yes.
comes out.
Yeah, and we don't have to hunt stuff down. It's all there.
And then the Brown Act, when our studies, when we first came on board, it also said you cannot block anybody. Oh, cool.
There's
See,
just
I'm-
one-
Hey, so what about blocking people? How about that?
Hey, I'm glad you asked. In fact, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go to the next slide, which you could be a straight man. This is wonderful. I love it. The issue of blocking people is the issue that's been litigated most recently, and that's not a Brown Act issue. That's a First Amendment issue. And it arises, some of the cases, there have been a number of cases, one of which went to the U.S. Supreme Court. I cite it there as Linkey v. Freed. It's actually 2024. The 2022 is an older date because the case was making its way up through the courts. The Supreme Court came out with an opinion on it written by Justice Amy Coney Barrett in March of this year, so it's very fresh and current. And in Linkey, what happened was a college student, actually, the way the opinion is written is very sympathetic to Linkey, or Freed, I guess it is actually. Freed is the guy whose website was at issue. He had set up this website as a college student, and it was mostly just family stuff and pictures of as he got older, of his wife, and they mentioned his dog Winston's on the site and his daughters, and so it was a lot of personal stuff. But as he got a little older, he ended up being the city manager of Port Huron, Michigan, which is the city of Michigan. And he started putting some official stuff on there, things about the city and about his job and things going on in the city. And Linkey, the plaintiff, didn't like some of the things that were going on in the city and made some very intemperate comments on Freed's website, and Freed cut him off and blocked Linkey and said, I don't want, I don't have to listen to this stuff basically on my website. I don't have to make it available to you. Linkey sued and said, this is an official state action. The First Amendment, as I'm sure you know, protects freedom of speech, but it only protects freedom of speech against the state or the city or government. It doesn't protect freedom of speech against your neighbor or somebody in your workplace or whatever. It's if there's state action that in some way is abridging speech. So Linkey said this site, because he's the city administrator or city manager of Port Huron, and because he has city things on his site, is really state action. And so therefore you can't stop me, or he can't stop me from commenting on his site. It's actually the same issue that we've come up with in many areas in Gilroy. For example, there was a proposal years ago to have banners across First Street and in Monterey Highway, and the idea was these banners would be open to anybody who wants to put a banner up, any organization. And then when we looked into the legality of that, we can do it. The city can do it. However, you can't say that organization can't put up a banner. This organization can, but now the Ku Klux Klan wants to do it, we're not going to let them, or some other organization.
I have a question.
Yeah. So let me finish my one sentence. So as a result, we said, if we're going to do that, this has to be city speech, not speech where we simply invite anybody to come in. We have the same issues with the flag policy out front, where the flag policy explicitly says the city will decide what flags can be flown, and it's city speech. It expresses city points of view. It's not simply open to anybody, because if it's open to anybody, then you can't stop somebody. So I'm sorry, go ahead with your question.
So I know this slide is under the social media topic, but is that also accounts for meeting? So if you have something on the agenda and then something else comes up that's not on the agenda, but we would like to talk about it, so in that sense we cannot be blocked. Is that happening in meeting as well?
But generally speaking, if things are not on the agenda, a commission or council cannot talk about them. However, unless you add them specially to the agenda, which you can do if it takes a 2/3 vote to do it, okay, and the need has to have arisen after the agenda was posted. Yeah. So there has to be some reason to discuss this thing because it's an urgent problem, which, you know, this is a rare situation.
And then, so basically we need to just get a motion going, and then 2/3 needs to agree, and then we can talk about it. Is that correct?
To make a motion to add something to the agenda that has to be seconded, 2/3 of you have to agree that you should add it to the agenda, and it has to be for a matter that the need for which is urgent and has arisen after the agenda was posted. So it can't just be because you forgot something or there's something else you want to talk about.
But it usually happens with contracts, like a contract or a grant that comes up and they didn't get it on the agenda, and it's like, and the council's not going to meet because it's the July break, and it's like, no, we need to add this because we need the approval so we can go and get more grant money for the Red Barn. But it has to be like an urgent item, came up after the agenda was posted, and action needs to be taken before the next meeting. So just having a discussion, I don't think would fit that category.
But
What are you thinking of? Yeah.
so can that be done for following meetings? So, for example, if it's not urgent, can that be scheduled for following meeting, or it has to be urgent even for that meeting or for the following meeting?
And Jolie should talk about that. That depends on how you do future agenda items. It's not an urgency issue.
Our charter, though, says that we can agendize things, but I mean the agendas are decided by staff and the chair. I mean, it's no guarantee it's going to be on the next meeting, right? Unless.
Brown Act issue, that
But I mean,
commission.
right? But the
procedural
question was,
issue, yeah.
if it's not urgent, can we agendize things? And our charter says we can. I just want to know how that play, because there is always a lot of, I think that's, at least from my part, there is a lot of questions regarding to that topic.
Aaron and Jolie, because it's a question of how you set up your own agendas. It's not a state law or Brown Act question.
It is about the First Amendment, no? No? So see, that's the confusion. That's when the confusion comes in, because if somebody can clarify that part, would be great. How can we set up things on the agenda?
So can you give an example? Maybe that would help them answer the question. I mean, are you thinking of like a particular issue or something that...
It doesn't need to have an example. It's general.
Just you don't
It's
have like
general.
a particular...
No, general.
I would assume it would have to be in the Planning Commission's purview.
Yes,
It can't be-
yes, yeah. But I mean general on that sense. Yeah, of course. I'm not going to talk about somebody else's dog on the meeting.
Okay, I'd be down for that, but
Yeah.
It's an issue just of your agenda, which I guess Sharon produces.
But it wouldn't be a First Amendment issue, because we're not talking about, like, because you said it's about, First Amendment issue is about the state or government oppressing speech, not like from neighbor to neighbor. And if we're in the government, we're in the government. I mean, there's a process to put things on an agenda, so there's no First Amendment issue there.
No, that's correct. It's not a First Amendment issue. You're not abridging anyone else's speech, so it's unrelated to what we're talking about here.
Okay.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Going back to the Linkey versus Freed case, so the opinion clarified what you should look at to decide whether a website is personal or business or mixed. Of course, the interesting issue is always when they're mixed, right? And which is in fact the case with probably most officials' websites. So the standard that Justice Barrett wrote was, it's down at the bottom of this slide, to be state action, which means that the website cannot block individuals. The official who's running the site must have actual authority to run it as an official site. So the city, in that case, must have granted this person, say, all right, you can be an official site for the city with your explanations of different things that are going on, or whatever it is, which was not the case here. He had not explicitly received any authority. And secondly, he must purport to use it as an official site. So what that means, in effect, for your own sites, if you have them, is it would make sense for you to have a disclaimer on your site that says very clearly, assuming this is the case, this is not an official site, it is not authorized by the City of Gilroy, it is a personal site, and is not subject to, well, we don't say anything. I guess that's all you have to say. The thing I was going to add would be to say, for official city business, please go to the city's website. And I would recommend that everybody who has a site that has some city business on it as well as personal, put that disclaimer on it. And it sounds like, from reading the opinion, that that disclaimer will be effective. Because for example, none of the council members has the authorization from the city to actually run an official site.
So,
question?
So basically, for the city officials that, like this gentleman here, for example, let's say he didn't have any personal items on that blog. He had a blog and he was just talking about things. Then, because it's not officially sanctioned by the city, then that exempted him from the inability to block someone from his site. So he was able to block because it was not officially sanctioned. Oof.
Out in his favor, the court said this is not an official site, even though you do talk about some official business kind of stuff, and therefore you can, in fact, block somebody. There are other cases, too. There's a related California case in which 2 school district members were blocking people, and they were getting really obnoxious stuff, like somebody would post the same thing on their site 250 times a day. You know, that kind of. The court said, oh, so there's an incidental burden to getting rid of it. In other words, the California court had ruled that it was a First Amendment violation. That case has been sent back down for review in light of the Supreme Court opinion, which I think will find it's not. And in fact, there's an article in the legal newspaper about it to highlight how clear all this stuff is. And this headline was about oral arguments in this second case. It says, arguments highlight murky rules on official social media. So that's the headline in the legal newspaper. And I think that is sort of exemplary of the complications here. Although I believe with this Supreme Court opinion, the situation actually will be clearer. Nonetheless, our best advice is, if you're running for office or want to sort of have a lot of city things on a site, set up a separate site. Don't put that on the same site where you have pictures of your family and your cats and dogs and your travel plans and all that kind of personal stuff. It might be okay to mix them, but it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea.
If there are any violations, what do we do at that point? Who do we report those to? Sharon, or
report what do you want to report?
I said, if there are violations that we identify that there's a violation of Brown Act, who do we report that to?
Well, what kind of violations by another commissioner? What are you talking about? What kind of violations do you mean? Are you referring to?
Any violation of the Brown Act that you're aware of, what would you do?
Violations of the Brown Act that you perceive, I think the best thing is to get in touch with Jolie or me.
Okay.
And we can talk to you about it and then decide if action is warranted or not. Okay? Yeah.
Because I was told by, and we could talk about that offline, I was told by someone that our city attorneys do not take action on Brown violations.
Act, but we can help clarify whether we think it's helpful or not. Ultimately, the Brown Act is enforced by the district attorney, if at all. There's a public integrity unit that worries about that.
So basically, it only gets enforced if someone sues.
Well, the public can enforce it, too. The public has the right. In fact, most of these lawsuits we talk about are from members of the public who say something illegal has been going on or something's rotten here, they're having secret meetings, and we think the DA should look into it. Jolie?
Yeah. The other thing you have to understand is the Brown Act, unlike the Public Records Act, it has a cure provision. So before you go to court or you go, want someone to take action, you have to give the local agency a notice that the agenda wasn't clear, that they took action on something that wasn't on the agenda. And then the agency, I believe, has 30 days to cure. So what you can do is you fix the notice, you put everything in the packet, and you just do it. You do a do-over. So there's a cure provision, and you should ask for cure before you go forward. And, you know, we've cured some things. I remember there was an allegation of a Brown Act violation, and the judge said it was in the marijuana case, and we didn't know what it was.
What happened was, I can tell the story. It's a war story. A cannabis dispensary opened in Gilroy about 10 years ago in violation of our zoning ordinance and without a business license, and we ended up shutting it down legally by legal process. But at one point, we went into a closed session where the council authorized the lawsuit to file it as a nuisance. And the dispensary claimed that that Brown Act session was illegal. But they never explained why. And actually, we had a hearing in court where the judge, as Jolie says, I wish you hadn't brought that up, but the judge issued an order, said this was illegal. And then he gets off the bench. I said, wait, excuse me, Your Honor, what did we do wrong? Can you tell us he says, it's what they said. Well, this wasn't very helpful because they really hadn't said anything. And neither of us thought it was illegal, but we had this court order. We cured it, and it was horrible. It was like on December 28th, we had another closed session. We got all the council back in over the Christmas holiday, had a closed session, reauthorized the lawsuit, which we won. So we did close it. But it was a distressing thing because we were accused of violating the law in some weird way we didn't know. The judge said we did, but we cured it. And then we went forward. And it was quite frustrating for us as attorneys, I have to say.
Yeah, usually the actions to cure that I've done in my career have been just sort of like you're really not sure, and it's like no harm, no foul. Okay, we'll put it back on the agenda. We'll adopt the resolution again, and it goes away, which is, but you usually have the council or, people asking you, why are you doing this? And sometimes you really don't know, but it's like, okay, well, we'll do a do-over, and they go away.
So that ends up social media. Next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about Robert's Rules of Order, because that question came up at a recent meeting. So the city follows Robert's Rules of Order, and actually Planning Commission is supposed to also. This is what it looks like. It's 700 pages long, and it's full of arcane rules for motions that never occur. But it has a few things that are useful. Robert's Rules is really set up more for large legislative bodies like Congress than it is for councils, but it does apply to, or can apply to councils, and most cities use it, although there are some other rules of order. Generally, the issue that comes up is motions. So I want to talk a little bit about motions. Normally, standard motion practice in Robert's Rules assumes there's a motion on the floor. And actually, it's interesting because in cities, we typically discuss matters before anyone makes a motion. Gilroy certainly does. The sort of model in Roberts is a motion is made first, then you discuss the motion, and various subsidiary motions might be made. I think that's the model because it's more of the congressional way. A bill is introduced, and then there's discussion of it, for example. But the normal way for motions, and then the issue is what happens with motions to amend and substitute motions. So a motion has to be seconded. Then if someone makes a motion to amend the motion during the discussion, if that motion is seconded, then that motion has the floor, the motion to amend. So the motion to amend is to say, instead of what the original motion said, I'm proposing slightly different language. For example, as Jolie gave, suppose there was a motion to approve a project with conditions of approval 1 through 32, and somebody says, I think we should add 33. So they could make a motion to amend to add 33. If that's seconded, that motion then takes precedence and would be voted and should be voted on first. So in other words, the vote would be, do we amend the main motion to add this additional condition of approval? And then you either vote on the main motion as amended or not amended, depending on whether the motion passed. Did you have a question?
When is it motion to amend must be seconded and then takes precedent? So before we discuss what the motion what the amendment actually entails. We have to all agree that we're okay with having the motion that's presented to us amended. Don't we have to kind of hear first?
No, that's not quite true. Let me go back and try to explain it again.
Okay.
Let's say the primary motion is approve a project with these conditions, 1 through 32. So and it's seconded, so that motion is the motion on the floor.
I have a question right there, though. I thought it doesn't get seconded there. Somebody makes a motion, then there's discussion, then during discussion maybe there's an amendment, right? Then we vote on the amendment, and then let's say the amendment doesn't pass, just for grins, it doesn't pass. So then the motion is the original motion. Then when we close discussion, that motion, or the amended motion if passed, then gets seconded, and then we vote.
Standard procedure. Standard procedure is no motion should be discussed until it is seconded. I realize sometimes we're a little lax about how we do that.
So the conflict I think that we had was that there was like, okay, now we vote. And I'm like, whoa, no, we do not vote. We discuss. So before, and I think that there was the heat of the night last time. But I think before, when we first came on, it was not consistent. And I think that's why we had, and the people who are here now, it's a very different commission than original when I came on board. It wasn't consistent. So, and so it's good that we're going over this.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how it should be, okay? The way it should be is a motion is made. Now, it might die for lack of a second. There should be immediately a question of is it seconded or not? Because if no one seconds it, then the motion's dead and it can't be discussed. That's how it should work. If the motion is seconded, then that motion has the floor. It's called the main motion. So the main motion is to approve the project with conditions 1 through 32. Then someone says, I would like to amend this motion to add condition 33. Is there a second? And someone seconds that motion. The motion to amend now has the floor and can be debated on the merits of should we approve the project and add number 33. Okay, so that motion and then should be voted upon. It either passes or fails. Let's say it passes. Then the chair should say the motion has passed, so the motion in front of the floor now is to approve the project with conditions 1 through 33, or whatever it is. That motion then is subject to discussion. Someone can offer a different amendment. I mean, this can go on and on. There can be more amendments to the motion, of course, but the basic structure is now you have the main motion, which is, let's say it has been amended or not. It then is subject to discussion and a vote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so
okay.
I forgot that we did the second, so the seconding goes. Okay, so then once we close discussion, the seconding has already been done. The amendment and seconding has already been done. Then we just vote at that point.
On one way or the other. It's either,
right.
It's either
but
passed
the
or failed.
amendment has already been voted on.
Right.
And that's already been added to the main motion. And then after it gets closed by the chair, then there's a vote. There's no seconding. It's just because we've already done that with the amendment vote. We already did it originally.
At the time the first motion was made.
That's what I just said. Yeah, they did it originally, and then we did the amendment, and then now it's just a vote. Love it.
Should work. Right.
I have a question regarding unconventional situation because, if there are times we're not ready to vote and somebody makes a motion, and then we are thinking about it, like we are 50-50, we are processing, how should we act in that situation? Should we ask to postpone to the end of the meeting to discuss something else first? What's the procedure? What's the process for that?
There's a motion and seconded, that has the floor, and unless something else... There are arcane motions, like I move to put something on the table or things like that, which I don't want to get into because it's not something you should be doing. But I think if someone has put a motion on the floor, it's time to discuss it and then potentially vote.
So in other words, the seconding only gets the whole thing started.
Yes.
It's not,
right.
Oh, now we're actually voting.
But even before...
as I said, the paradigm in Robert's Rule of Order is a motion is made at the start and it's seconded, and then it focuses the discussion. What we do typically in cities is not that. Usually there's some discussion, and then at some point, for example, the chair might say, we're ready for a motion, and then somebody makes a motion. And that's okay, too. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That's perfectly an acceptable way to proceed.
And that's kind of how we've been doing it here. And,
Right.
and keep me honest. So there's a presentation, public comment, then there's questions with the developer or whoever has their project, and then we have questions and we kind of discuss. And then, Manny, sometimes you do, if somebody doesn't bring up a motion, Manny does ask, I'm sorry, Chair Bendall, does ask, does someone have a motion? And then which is excellent, but I think and I don't want to speak for you, but I think we have seen in the past where there's none of that in the beginning. I mean, we have the presentation, then somebody's got a motion. There's been no questioning or discussion, and we still have questions that we want to have answered before the discussion on
Make
the
a
motion.
suggestion
How does
for
that
that.
work?
Well, it works fine, because what the chair should say, someone makes a motion, then you don't vote on it, right? The chair should say, all right, the motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? And then you ask your questions. You ask your questions, and eventually a vote is taken. That's the way that should work. And it's the normal procedure.
So we need to just be clear that when it's the making the motion and seconding it is not a signal that, okay, now we're voting. It just means that just starts the process. It just allows us to go into a discussion or making amendments, discussing the amendments. And so then we're circling back around to then vote on it. But so I think, I'm speaking for myself, I misunderstood that as well. I thought when somebody motioned and seconded, it feels like, okay, we're right there, we're going to jump in the vote, and that's why it felt rushed.
We're saying that because often in the commission and other parts, sometimes in the council, motions come at the very end. There's been a lot of discussion already. However, the chair should always say, is there any debate on the motion? And then people can debate as much as they want. Good. There is a procedure to call the question. I don't want to get into that unless you have a question about how that works, because it's pretty arcane, too. I do want to discuss this issue of friendly amendments, which is probably a term you've heard, where the motion is made and seconded, so it has the floor, and then somebody says, I'd like to make a friendly amendment to let's say, add condition 33. Is that okay with the maker of the motion and the second? And the maker of the motion and second say yes, and so the meeting proceeds as though that amendment has been made. That's really not proper. There really is no such thing as a friendly amendment. In fact, it's simply a motion to amend. But what the chair should do, I think, in that case, so I have a suggestion. If somebody makes a friendly amendment, and it's clearly most people, or maybe everybody, will think this is appropriate to amend the motion, the chair could just say, is there any objection? And if not, then by unanimous consent, the motion's amended. Doesn't mean you passed the motion. You've just agreed to amend it. I think that's the way to do it. And if somebody says, I object, then the friendly amendment is a motion to amend, like any other motion to amend. It takes precedence. It should be debated and voted upon.
Yeah, but a lot of times when someone makes a friendly amendment, the chair will say to the maker of the motion, do you accept the friendly amendment? And they say yes or no. So
That's not correct, although
I know,
we do that. And I think, in effect, what we're doing is saying there's sort of unanimous consent to it because nobody's raising their hand and saying, wait a minute, I want to discuss this amendment.
Just to clarify, if one person says no, that changes the whole thing, or has to be majority?
Says no, then the friendly amendment, a motion, that's a motion to amend, which is now on the floor and should be debated and then voted upon. You don't need a majority or anything because all you're saying is I want to debate the motion.
Okay.
Which is the normal process, actually. It's confusing because it's not kind of been running meetings, but that's what it should be. So I have something even more arcane now. You ready for this?
Nope.
Wait a minute, we'll go back. Sorry. No. And that's motion to substitutes. And I got into this with Dion at a council meeting, Councilman Bracco, where I ruled a substitute motion out of order, and he was thought I was out of order, and he was a little put out by it. people sometimes say there's a motion on the floor, it's been seconded, you're debating, and someone says, I want to make a substitute motion. Okay?
Oh.
And that's what Dion did. And that was seconded. So a substitute motion, Roberts, and again, this is not universal, but Roberts here, our Bible, treats a substitute motion as a motion to amend, subject to the same rules as an amended. Okay? Not all parliamentary books think that. And one of the rules of that is a motion to amend or substitute cannot negate the original motion. It can change it. But that gets pretty tricky. For example, again, I keep using Jolie's example here. Let's say the motion is to approve the project with conditions 1 through 32, and then somebody says, I want to make a substitute motion to deny the project. That would, in my opinion, that's out of order because it negates the basic thing. If somebody wants to make a substitute motion to delete condition 25 and add 3 other conditions, that's okay. That's, in effect, a motion to amend the motion that's on the floor. Roberts gives this example, which I have in the slide. I'm not sure if this is going to confuse you or not because this is a kind of tricky example. The example is the legislative body is sending a delegate to a convention. And the motion is we're going to instruct our delegate to say something, say X. According to Roberts, it would be okay to say we instruct our delegate to say Y instead of X, something different. But it would not be okay to say we don't instruct our delegate to say X. This is a pretty subtle difference, frankly, but it gets to the issue of the proper way. It gets to the issue of what is a proper amendment, and the proper amendment should. The motion is we're sending the delegate, so we're still sending him or her. So if we change what the delegate says, that's only changing part of the motion, but it's not negating the whole motion. Anyway, that's the example Roberts uses. So I think the point is that substitute motions and motions to amend should be motions that basically change the original motion in some way without denying it completely.
Wouldn't this example that you just gave,
I'm sorry?
wouldn't this substitute motion be, if you want to send, so the emotion is we're going to send, Mr. Smith to go talk about X. This example of a substitute motion in my mind is saying we don't want him to say anything. So wouldn't you just vote no then on the motion to hopefully kill the motion altogether?
You might, and on the other hand, let's go back to a simpler motion. A motion is made to approve a project, and somebody says, I want to make a substitute motion to deny the project. I believe that would be out of order because that's just 180 degrees apart from where you were on the basic motion. It's not an amendment. The proper procedure there is to vote no on the motion to approve, and then somebody makes a motion to deny.
So it's similar to what we did last meeting. So a motion was made to recommend staff's recommendations with all the mitigating factors. And some people vote, and it was seconded, and some people voted for that, and some people voted against that. I mean, wouldn't that be the same thing as that kind of an example of a substitute motion, rather than, for example, someone saying, well, I want to do a substitute motion where we don't recommend any of it. We don't recommend staff's recommendations.
In the straightforward application you're talking about, it would be similar, yes. But there are much more complicated things.
Okay.
Sometimes, every so often when you hear the Senate, the U.S. Senate, getting tied up in rules of procedure and they're making incredibly difficult, complex variations on motions and nobody can figure out what they're really doing, then it's hard to tell. In that situation, a motion was made to approve, it failed 3-3. If somebody had made a motion or had made a motion to deny, it would have failed 3-3.
Right.
So either way, it didn't matter. Okay, we're moving on.
One quick question for clarification for me,
Yes.
please. So my fear is always where a motion is a race condition. First person to the microphone gets their motion in. So I just want to understand this very clearly for myself, that we have our questioning time, and then when we all decide that that time is over, that is when the time for a motion happens, not in the middle of questioning.
Asking my clarification, I would say no, I don't agree with you. The motion can be made at the beginning, it can be made at the middle, it can be made at the end. The parliamentary procedure allows any of those.
So that,
but in
to
any
me,
event, after it's seconded, it is subject to debate.
So it could happen right after the presentation.
It sometimes does at the council. Yeah, it can. But if it's seconded, it's then subject to debate. Sometimes, as I said, that is the archetypal way things are supposed to be done according to Roberts. We often debate and then make a motion at the end, and that's okay also. But that motion is still subject to debate.
But so our charter says that commissions can identify the way they want to run their meetings. So we could decide that we have a time for motions.
You have bylaws, and you could change your bylaws to provide for something different if you wanted to. I don't know if it's a good idea or not. Right now, there's flexibility in when the motion is made, and that seems to be fine. But
I'm
it is
just
something
saying we have that option.
It's something I think you do. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I had my stuff. Okay. So we talked a little bit about public records being a transparency law, just like Brown Act is, and it's like the Brown Act being open meetings. The Public Records Act is open records, and having the public a right to public records. And public records, by definition, have to relate to the public's business, owned, maintained, and possessed by the entity. And so there's so many exceptions to the Brown Act, but that's the general rule. Is they're the city's writings. They are prepared, owned, used, retained by the local agency. Like everything in the packet would be a public record. So that's the fundamental. You have public records, and they're should be made available to the public upon request. So Andy's already talked about the San Jose case. So private emails relating to city business, as we've talked, are public records. So the caution is the San Jose case, and doing business on your private email instead of your planning commission email. We advise against that. The rule is just assume anything you write in an email could be public or it will become public. And so sometimes when you're upset and you want to write that email complaining about something, maybe you hold it and you look at it the next day. Because if it's about public business, and the newspaper does a public records request, I don't have an exception there's no exception for something that looks bad, makes you look bad, or is embarrassing. And so if it fits the criteria of a public record without some other exemption, it's going to go out. So I can give an example from years ago. There was something about someone raising some. There was something about a dog fight on the canal or something, and then it was how the police responded, and there was questions about it, and so then the PRAs came in, and about how the dog was taken away or not taken away or something like that. But anyway, there were all these emails, and then there were emails between staff, and there were emails between staff and the police, and this and that, and and there were some emails that said, we should be working. We have other things to do than, worry about this, this case or something. And, I released those records because there was no reason. I let people know, this is a lesson learned. And they may have felt that way, that this is a big waste of our time, but the public has a right to review, see records unless there's an exception, and in that case there was no exception. Just like the Brown Act, Public Records Act can be subject to legal action, and at times attorney's fees may be awarded to the requester. The case law is not good for the cities because the requesters, if the city produces records after the lawsuit's brought, attorney fees may be awarded, but for the city that prevails in a Public Records Act case, the city gets its attorney's fees paid only if the request was clearly frivolous. So it's not fair to us. And as I said earlier, there's no cure provision for the Public Records Act. If we fail to respond or failed to produce, there's no one saying, oh, by the way, you didn't do this in 10 days, or you didn't respond in 14 days, or you didn't do this. And then you say, oh, that's right, so-and-so was on vacation, we'll do it now. But there's no cure provision. So that can be problematic. So now I'm going to move on to, because we're trying to keep this quick on, but so conflicts of interest, that's under the Political Reform Act. And the general overall rule is having a conflict does not mean you did something wrong. It just means that you have a financial interest in a business, in the property, or something that you should not participate in making, or try to attempt to use your official position to influence a governmental decision where you have a financial interest. So making and participating is very broad. I can talk about that later, but how the Political Reform Act applies to you specifically is there's disclosure requirements and then there's disqualification requirements. So you're all subject to the Form 700, and you have to disclose certain interests, income, or real property. And then if you receive a gift from one person of $50 or more, it should be stated on your Form 700. Disqualification, and here's some of the sources of income. Disqualification for that gift of $50 or more, if that same person gives you up to $590 within 12 months, that's a disclosure requirement of all those $50 lunches, but then when it gets to $590 and that person comes before the Planning Commission for a use permit or a design review permit or something, you cannot participate. So there's the disclosure in your Form 700, and then there's the disqualification. And the sources of income is anyone that's a source of income, $500 within 12 months. That's very low. Indirect or direct interest in of $2,000 more in a business entity, or even real property. So the $2,000 in interest in real property hasn't changed forever. The gift keeps growing. That one keeps growing, but nowadays a direct or indirect interest in real property of $2,000, I mean, that's a very, very low bar. So the one that really applies to the Planning Commission most of the time is if the decision could affect the value of the real property located within 500 feet of your property. And these rules go back and forth, and now we're back to, I try to refer to it as the donut rule. So the inside of the donut is the 500 feet, then the donut is 501 feet to 1,000 feet. But if you're within the donut hole, it's presumed that it will have a material impact if you vote on that project. There's no rebuttable presumption anymore. It has just been presumed material. And it's boundary to boundary. Your property boundary to the boundary of the park where you're voting on the red barn. It's not 500 feet to the red barn. It's from the park. So there's some different rules about condo complexes because of the common interest. But so anyway, that's part of the donut rule. And then for ownerships of real property, so this is 500 to 1,000 feet. It's got some factors. Does it change the parcel's development potential, income producing, highest and best use, market value, or does it change the character of the property by altering traffic levels, intensity of use, parking, view, privacy? These are all very, very subjective, and if you are within that 500 feet to 1,000 feet, I ask the public official to go through those factors and figure out if they believe that it would be an impact or it could change the parcel's character. I don't know. That's a subjective determination. You can get FPPC opinions on this. We've gotten FPP decisions for some council members in the past. But in that letter asking the FPPC if you have a conflict, you would have to put in, here's my parcel, here's the surroundings, and they're very fact intensive. And they're only as good as the facts that you give them. If you give them just basic facts, they'll just say, sorry, based on these facts, we can't come to a determination. And so you want to make sure you give the FPPC attorneys that are reviewing your request, go through those factors and really make it factually specific. And we get those all the time. Yeah.
I just want to mention, turn your mic off. As Jolie says, we have gotten such opinions. We had one for Dan Harney when he was a council member, when there were traffic calming situations being put not on his street, but on a street a little ways away from his house. The question was, could he vote on the traffic calming devices, or do they somehow materially affect his property or not? I mean, these are complex, it's not a simple question at all. We had one for Don Gage years ago when he worked for Christopher Ranch, and we had the residential development ordinance in which permits were essentially allocated to some developers and not others. It was kind of a zero-sum game. And his employer, Christopher Ranch, owned some property that was the subject of some of these. And the question was, he recused himself from voting on those properties, but the question was, could he vote on the other properties? Because if you vote on other properties, that would be, as I say, it's a zero-sum game. We ended up with an 8-page single-spaced letter to the FPPC, which they answered and gave us a bit of guidance on. They're pretty responsive. I think, Sharon, do you have the maps of where everybody lives, too? So if there's any question, ask Sharon, because we do have GIS maps that should show where everybody's house is in relation to
the maps are provided to every commissioner.
So then, recusal, you have to publicly identify your financial interest, refrain from discussing on it or voting on it. And as I said, making or participating in a governmental decision is broadly determined, it's applied. You don't talk to the planning staff, you don't talk to your planning commissioners, you stay out of it. On both sides of the dais, you do not participate. You just stay out of it. And the rule is that you step down from the dais and you leave the room. During COVID, we just told people, turn your mic off and turn your screen off because, that's how we left the room during COVID. And then you don't have to leave the room and step down for consent items. So 5 consent items and you had a conflict on number 4, you would say, I'm voting on the consent items, but I'm noting for the record that I have a conflict on item 4 and won't be participating in that. Or if it's a personal interest of yours, you can step down from the dais and come back and address the Planning Commission or the council. But if you have a conflict, you can't participate in a closed session. This is mostly for like council members. And disqualified member doesn't count towards the quorum. So I think we had that time with you, Joni, that we had only 4 people and you had a conflict, and so we had to continue the item till more people came back. And I think that was one of the first times where we had to, sorry, we can't hear your item. And I think they came from out of town too, and we didn't know, yeah.
It was those apartments by my house, and I was within 500 feet of it, and I couldn't.
No, and we were down to 4. So
yeah.
then we have 3, and we can't even legally act. So we had to continue that item. And then the other thing is if you've got questions, contact the city attorneys early.
Rule, and I want to just make sure I get it right, but that came out, I think, last year that says, let's say you have an agenda with a bunch of items, and there are 2 items on it, and you actually come into the meeting after the first item, and you would be disqualified on the first item, but you came in after it. You have to announce that. When you come in, you have to say, if I had been here, I would have recused myself.
Yeah, the minutes should reflect that, too.
Right.
I know.
Similarly, if you come in and vote on the first one, and let's say you're disqualified in the second one, so you leave before, or you just leave the meeting for some reason before the second one, you're supposed to announce that you would have been disqualified had you been there. It's a very peculiar, there must be some abuse that someplace was occurring that led to that rule.
That's what I heard. It was a practice like out of Southern California. People would, leave the meeting and then come back so they didn't participate or they were not involved in the action on it. But I guess it was happening enough that the legislator changed that.
If you happen to leave in the middle of the meeting, suppose there are only 4 of you and one of you leaves, then there's no quorum anymore and you can't take action.
Okay. And then, so the ethical rules, these are in addition to the FPPC financial rules. Ethical rules are just, the perception is important as the reality. The FPPC rules, the financial rules and regulations, they're the minimum. They're what you must do. And ethics is really what you ought to do. And this gets into common law conflicts, and that is really for due process and fair hearings. And the public and the applicant, too, they expect you to be impartial and avoid favoritism. That's why we have ex parte disclosures, is if you've gotten outside evidence that may affect your decision or your fellow commissioner members, you should disclose it. So everybody knows the basis of how or why you're voting, and the public has a right to know that you went out there and you noticed something really different and it wasn't in the staff report and it has bearing on your decision. And then abstentions, that's when you abstain. You don't vote yes, you don't vote yes. You should vote. You should come prepared to vote. And abstentions are counted toward the quorum, but not the vote. So that's just, so if you abstain, it's not going to break the quorum. But it would be 3 yes, 3 no's, and then 1 abstain. So that would be a tie vote, or, 4, 2, and 1. The motion would pass, 4 yeas, 2 no's, and 1 abstain. So then I'm going to turn this back over to Andy for Levine Act that he's excited about.
Can I ask about abstaining? Is there any reason to ever abstain, or is really recusing what you do, not abstaining?
If you have a financial interest, a conflict, you need to recuse and leave the room. If you have some personal reason why you feel that you can't be fair and impartial, you should not participate, and you could not participate in the vote. But just not wanting to make the decision and not wanting to vote yes or not wanting to vote no and abstaining, you have a right to do that. but it's really not doing your job. Your job is to come and make that decision. And if you're abstaining because you need more information, or you will be abstaining because you just feel like you don't have everything to get you to a yes or to get you to a no, you could bring that up because your fellow planning commissioners might be in the same boat. You know, I need to know a little bit more. But just abstaining because, as I've used as an example sometimes, like you're in this, you know, you're in the sandbox and you're playing, and then all of a sudden the playing gets a little rough. You know, you just don't jump out of the sandbox and say, I give up, I'm not going to vote on this, because the public and your fellow commissioners expect you to do your duty to vote. So that's the rule.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you're supposed to, if you abstain, say why you're abstaining as well. I mean, it is allowed, but it's heavily discouraged because you're appointed to vote. And people, the most common reason, I think, the most common illegitimate reason that someone abstains is they don't want the politics of it there. They don't want to offend a certain group, or they think politically it will be bad for them or whatever. And, you know, that, again, with the council particularly, they're elected to vote. They're not elected to just say, I'm not going to vote if it might offend somebody. So we certainly discourage abstentions. Jolie and I had a project in another city some years ago where the vote was 3-1, 5-member council, 3-1, and then the fifth person said, I'm voting not here.
What?
And they said, so the clerk said, all right, so I should write this down as a no vote. Is that right? He said, no, I'm not here. So should I put you down as abstaining? And he said, no. He says, I'm not here. I mean, it's like no one's listening to me. It's as though I'm not here. So the clerk, I believe, did register it as an abstention, but it wasn't helpful, and it was kind of childish, frankly. But in any event, these things fortunately don't happen.
The person should have made a motion to carry for the next meeting, or maybe just vote no. Like if nobody's hearing me, then it's no, right? Yeah.
So this is kind of a trap for the unwary. There are provisions that, let's say you're sitting up here and you realize during the hearing, oh my God, we've got a bunch of other people. I didn't realize that nobody's on that list. It's not kidding. It's not going to disclose it. I wasn't thinking about this, realize it. If that said, you may have to go down through the list, announce this, and if you don't, you may have to continue to vote. You have to return the money within 30 days. You have to say you're going to do that, and then you have to do it. And then somebody can question, well, why didn't you know that you had this money? You should have known that because it's all your balances. It can be very, very confusing. And the $250 limit is relatively low. So it's a great thing. It's an interesting question whether developers can try to explain. It's a tactic that in some situations is used where a developer has lived for $100 here and they'll never go back 12 months. And it says, you can't vote for the project against it. Because you accept
This might be too nitpicky, and it's okay if you don't know. This might be too nitpicky, and it's okay if you don't know. What if the entity that made the donation is acquired, or really my question is, it changes its name? Because I'm thinking like that would be one reason why you might not know that the developer in front of you, they could have changed their company name. Are they the same entity then at that point, since they now have a new tax ID, they have a new, all of that's all new?
I would say it's the same. Yeah, and it doesn't matter. And furthermore, related companies get applied in together, too, in very complex ways. So we have now kind of an overview of planning generally. We have another 10 slides. Should we go into that now, or should we put that for another training? What's the will of the Commission? The question is, we've finished this part of our training. We have another 10 slides that talk about zoning, conditional use permits, variances, general plan, all of that. Do you want to hear that now, or do you want us to come back and do that? Because we've been talking for quite a while.
Come back.
Yeah. Just because the physical conditions here with this thing blowing.
Yeah.
Everybody okay with that?
But I wanted to ask the question.
Wait.
I'll second, okay? I'm tired.
Right.
I think the consensus is to move
Working,
it.
right? Yeah, please.
Your attention, we appreciate it. And to answer questions and happy to talk to you. And we enjoy that part of our job, frankly. It makes it more interesting. Thank you.
Great, and we're going to move it to a future date to be determined. Thank you. All right. Item 8, informational items, planning division staff approvals. I see the Dutch brothers.
Correct. So this is approval from the planning division, and of course they'll be applying for a building permit, and then proceeding to construction. We haven't gotten the building permit yet, but hopefully. Oh, yeah, it is on. Okay, I'll speak louder. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yes. So as you see from our staff approval report, the planning staff has approved their architectural and site review permit. They haven't submitted for the building permit application yet, but once they do that, they'll proceed onto the building permit stage, and we'll be able to start construction. So sometime in the future, we're looking at more coffee. That's what I'm trying to say. Any questions? Which shopping center? The one at 10th and yes, yeah. As you see, there are buildings going up already. So some of the other ones are in the plan check stage for their building permits. Yeah, they are all proceeding at different stages.
Great, thank you. Item 9, planning division report.
I guess that was kind of the planning division report. Yeah, before I forget, actually, there's a different type of coffee there, right? So we'll have lots of choices of brands to choose from.
Other than Starbucks? All right, thank you. Item 10, Assistant City Attorney Report.
Nothing to report.
All right, with that, I adjourn to the next meeting of July 11th, 2024 at 6 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course. Move it to the... Yeah, no, that's good. That's perfect. Okay. Yeah, I will. I'll message you, and then we'll link up. Did anybody reach out from leadership?
No one.
Okay, all right. I'll make sure. There is Denise.
From anybody.
Cool. I'll message them because I know they're planning.